Right.
Okay. So Kyra is going to be talking today about her work with animals and helping with how animals and animal assisted stuff will help with trauma or just healing in general. So we're really glad to have her on. She actually is a former volunteer of RCEA, and it's really cool to see all the awesome things people go and end up doing after their time with us. Kira is doing really, really great things. And she actually, I'm not sure if she mentions this in her slide, but I'll go ahead and brag on her. She is the first full-time social worker in Colorado at an animal shelter, which is pretty cool. So she's basically, leading the way for other animal shelter social workers. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and let her get started and give her presentation. But thank you for joining us today. And also thank you so much, Kira, for giving us your lunch hour.
Thank you, Faith. I appreciate it. And like I was saying earlier, it is such a full circle moment just because I was at RCEA for several years during undergrad, and to be able to come back and talk about a topic for the organization is such an honor. So such a full circle moment, and I'm honored to be here. Before I get started, is my presentation showing up correctly, or is it showing like the slide numbers at the bottom?
It is showing slide numbers at the bottom.
Okay, let me try and fix that real quick. Hey, how's that?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I am going to be talking about the impacts of pets and people after a crisis and the protective factors that animals do have on anyone that is coming out of a crisis or going through impacts of trauma with their mental health. So first, I'll do a quick introduction about me. Faith gave a very brief introduction that I did work as a previous RCEA volunteer. I originally got my undergrad degree at Auburn and started off doing pre-vet, but realized quickly that I wanted to work more directly with people. During my time at Auburn, found social work and hoped that I could merge the two. And so I completed my degree in social work at Auburn, and then found that the University of Denver was the only school in the nation that had an animal component to their degree. So I moved to Denver to get my master's in social work. I did a concentration in children and youth, risk and healthy development, as well as did a certificate in human animal environment interactions, where I dived deeper on human animal interactions and connections and the benefits that humans and animals can have on one another, as well as our shared environment. And also did research with the Institute for Human Animal Connection that's actually based in the Graduate School of Social Work at DU. So a lot of what I will be talking about is from research studies done by the Institute or talks from professors at the Institute, as well as some other research. And I am also the first full-time social worker in Colorado that is based out of an animal shelter. So I'll also do a brief intro on what that looks like and what I'm doing currently at the shelter and how that ties into the presentation today. So I am the Better Together program manager at Foothills Animal Shelter, which is basically a community program that provides safety net services to try and keep humans and animals together and preserve that family unit. Our mission statement is that we believe animals are an integral part of the family, and research shows that the family and their pets benefit when pets can stay with or be reunited with their owners after a traumatic experience. So we have several different facets that we do within the Better Together program. The most primary one is that we provide up to 10 days of safekeeping for the pet for any owner who may be going through a crisis, such as being evicted or going through a domestic violence situation and needing a safe place for their pet. If someone is hospitalized, just any sort of crisis like that. During those 10 days, I work as that person's case manager. So we have several partnerships that provide human service operations. And so I work as the case manager to connect them to those human service agencies, while also working here at the shelter to provide some services for their pet while they're here. So for their pet, we can provide free vaccines, free microchip, free spay neuter while their animals are here on site with us. We also have a behavior team that works with each animal. We operate from a fear-free perspective. So our behavior team works with each animal to try and lower the fear, frustration, and anxiety that each animal feels while in shelter. And that is also something that we strive for our patrons as well. We also just try to create a safe space for any patrons who are coming in. We call our clients patrons. And so we have a separate office from the rest of the shelter so that our patrons who are often experiencing a high crisis experience right now in the moment can come in, have a place to sit down, relax, calm down, have a piece of candy, just chat a little bit and feel comfortable and share what they may need to and tell us really as much as they would choose to. And then with my background in social work, I'm able to kind of help them with navigating the crisis that they're experiencing and any trauma that may be coming up from that. Here's a little glimpse from last year. Last year we had 660-ish animals in the program, which was about 428 patrons. On average, the animals stayed with us for 9 days. Most of them we were able to find placement in another shelter that had a longer ability for foster. And of those, 80% of the animals were able to be reunited with their families rather than being placed in a whole new environment, having to create a whole new connection and then resulting in that family losing an important family member. This year, we're already seeing higher numbers than last year. It was our first year kind of on the ground with operations that we have now. So our pilot year, if you will, and this year we're already seeing much higher numbers. The top reasons for use was due to hospitalization, housing challenges, or incarceration. A close one behind that is domestic violence. We have a partnership with a domestic violence group just down the street from us. They're called Porchlight Family Justice Center. And they have 75 different partner agencies, all based out of their location, providing a different service to families who are experiencing violence in any capacity. So we have some Foothills volunteers that have our own cubicle on site there, and we keep that stocked with animal food, animal supplies, and also a way to reach me so they can get connected to our protective custody program and access those 10 days, as well as any services they might need for their own animal as well. So our program really focuses heavily on the human-animal bond and that connection that it is there. And the American Veterinary Medical Association describes the bond as a mutually beneficial and dynamic relationship between people and animals, essential to the health and well-being of both. And we will see later in the presentation that there is more and more research being done that shows the scientific health and well-being benefits behind human-animal relationships. 70% of American homes have pets. In 2022, that was a study that was done, and around 85% of those homes consider their pets to be part of the family. So this is a graphic that was put on by the National Link Coalition. They took their power and control reel that was developed mostly just for domestic violence and put an animal lens on there to show the links between animal abuse and human abuse that could be occurring in the home. So it breaks down each category of isolation, emotional abuse, economic abuse, intimidation, using children or pets, legal abuse, just any of those facets. And it details some of the experiencing that they could be using that pet to gain some more control, or even threatening to harm that animal as a form of control. And then on the side, we have a little bit of statistics. So 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the US, and 30% of DV survivors have reported that their abuser also threatened to harm or kill their pet. So there is a pretty large link between the human and the animal safety there, as well as an American is assaulted every 68 seconds, and sexual animal assault, which is such a horrific thing to think about, is about 1.3% of all reported animal abuse. So there's also a link there on that end. So diving in a little bit about trauma and the brain and what our brain does whenever we experience trauma in the short term and in the long term. So cortisol is called the stress hormone, and that is what is released whenever we are experiencing a high stress and traumatic situation. And this cortisol goes into these important areas of our brain that changes the way that we think and we perceive the world. So the cortisol comes in and it actually shrinks the portion of our prefrontal cortex that's operating. And that is the part of our brain that is in charge of making decisions, processing the world, and understanding things clearly. And so that part of our brain goes offline, as well as the amygdala, that is the part that's in charge of holding all of the emotions and the emotional response that we have to any situation or any memory. So the cortisol floods over to the amygdala and has that part of the brain working hypervigilantly. So anytime we think of that trauma event or something that could remind us of it, it could trigger that emotional response. Even if we aren't in that dangerous situation, that could be something that we are still feeling the effects of. As well as the hippocampus. The cortisol floods into the hippocampus, which is the part of our brain that distinguishes and codes experiences that we have. So it is the part of the brain that says, okay, I experienced this thing and that was in the past, so it's no longer in the present. This cortisol blocks the way that it codes how we experience the trauma. And so now the past becomes the present. The two are blurred, and it can become difficult for anyone who has experienced trauma to differentiate that feeling of being in danger versus being safe, because that past could feel like it's ever present and occurring now. And then the oxytocin, which is considered the love hormone, it's what regulates our social interactions and our attachments with other people, as well as our mood, our anxiety levels. And that oxytocin is actually lowered during trauma responses, leading cortisol to be the most present thing in the brain. And so this is the polyvagal theory, and it dives into more on the brain and basically how our autonomic nervous system adapts to trauma. So it just breaks down what our brains are thinking and feeling on this chart. And there are different levels. So the green is the social engagement, and that's when you're feeling grounded, you're feeling safe, and you're calm. Your digestion is normal. Your resistance to infection is normal. You're able to just relax and be yourself and do the things that you enjoy. However, when we start entering into that fight or flight, sympathetic, hyper-aroused state, we start feeling more frustration, more worry and concern and irritation. Our heart rate and blood pressure is going up. We may experience higher chances of blood clotting. And then when that state is maintained in for a long time, or we have another trigger that is piled on top of it, we enter into the life threat phase or the dorsal vagal phase. And that can be combated or joined with depression, dissociation, shame. It also affects our fuel storage and our insulin activity. It blocks our endorphins that helps to numb, and it raises our pain threshold. It also can decrease our muscle tone. It can impact heart rate and blood pressure. It can actually change the way that we attune ourselves to other human voices around us. And especially if the cortisol level is at a heightened state for a long-term period of time, and we stay in that dorsal vagal life threat zone for a long time, that can cause some long-term effects, which can affect fertility. It can affect our social relationships, and just has some pretty negative impacts for our own physical and mental well-being. And so the way that the polyvagal theory describes this is through neuroception, which is how our brain is responding to the trauma and seeing the world, which will play into the way that animals can help to buffer some of these effects. So the research that has been done has shown that pets actually activate the neuroception of safety in the brain, and it engages our polyvagal system and helps us to start lower back down into that green safe zone. Research has also showed that even just spending 5 or 10 minutes with a dog or a cat can reduce the cortisol level and increase the oxytocin, or that love hormone in our brains, as well as even 30 seconds of just seeing a dog or cat can also reduce cortisol and increase oxytocin. So whenever we are spending time, even with an animal that's just in our home, it doesn't have to be in a therapeutic setting, just sitting with an animal and petting them, that provides some sensory stimulation that can help with mindfulness and centering us and grounding us, bringing us back into the moment, so that if we are dissociating or if there is a perceived threat in the space, having an animal there that can sit with you and ground you, and you can physically feel them and hear them, that helps with bringing us back into the present, as well as provides connection and companionship with someone. If someone has experienced a traumatic event, humans might be perceived as a threat. And animals might be, that form of safety and companionship for that person, because they may not perceive the animal to be a threat in the same way that they do with humans in the moment. So interacting with the pets, that does interrupt the cortisol accumulation, and that can help to prevent some long-term effects of trauma impacts. So I want to talk about the 3 different categories of working animals. The first is an emotional support animal, therapy animal, and a service animal, and they are all different. So the first is an emotional support animal, and these are just pets who are living in our home. And just by nature of being in our home and that connection that we have with them, they are relieving some symptoms from a disability that we might have, and it must meet DSM criteria, that disability. So an emotional support animal is an animal who has a letter written by a mental or a physical healthcare provider stating that the animal is aiding and relieving symptoms from a disability, and that can be physical or mental. So like I said, it could be that petting the animal is helping with dissociation, if that's what we're experiencing from our disability, or any similar thing like that. Therapy animals, however, they are obedience trained, and they inherently should act favorably with humans. And I put quotation marks around that always because it's definitely a subjective thing when it comes to animals. So they are actually obedience trained, and they assist with therapy sessions, or they go into hospitals and work with the patients there, or they're going into assisted living facilities, just to provide some connection, support to anyone in those facilities. But they can also be part of one-on-one therapy sessions, which is called animal assisted therapy, into traditional talking therapy. And there's tons of examples that I have listed later to show what therapy with an animal might look like and the benefits that it might have for that session. And the last is a service animal, which is only a dog or a miniature horse, dictated by the ADA. Those are the only 2 animals who can be categorized as a service animal. And these are trained to perform tasks, which again can be physical or mental. So they could be trained to be seeing eye dog for someone who is blind, or they might be trained to provide deep pressure therapy to someone who is having anxiety, or can alert someone if they're having a seizure. Specifically with the trauma that some of our clients might be experiencing due to sexual assault or domestic violence. It could be that that dog or that miniature horse, I have not seen that myself, but it does exist, is trained to alert you and let you know if there is someone in the room with you or not, or to do the deep pressure therapy to let you know that you're in a safe place and to kind of bring you back. So there's lots of ways in which animals can just inherently benefit humans. And I wanted to focus more so on the animal assisted therapy piece, as I believe that a lot of the folks watching this are interested in doing some one-on-one client therapy. So research has shown that clients will talk almost twice as much in the presence of a safe animal during therapy sessions. And that is just because having an animal in the room can promote rapport with a client as well as their provider. It can create a safe talking place. You can start relating on like, oh, well, I had an animal, and just start sharing stories. And it creates a sense of trust, as well as it allows that individual to start trusting themselves with an animal and saying, oh, this animal thinks that I'm safe. This animal likes me. I can trust what I'm doing to make this animal also feel safe. And it increases the sense of trust overall, which is so important to creating that neuroceptic safety to alter brain functioning and preventing lingering trauma effects. So here are some examples of what some animal-assisted therapy might look like. It could just be traditional talk therapy. You could have a cat or a dog in the room with you, maybe a cat sitting in the lap, even a guinea pig or a rat sitting in laps. It could be that you are in that talk therapy session and someone is throwing a ball for a dog to catch. And so they are focused on what's going on with that animal, which could make it a little bit easier to disclose and discuss some really hard topics. Could also engage in bathing an animal and discussing what that feels like. Oftentimes with PTSD or trauma, it could feel unsafe to enter into a shower or bathe yourself, or it could be difficult due to some depressive symptoms. And so working with an animal and bathing them could actually help to open up a conversation around that and say, you know, this animal is safe in the bath. How is this making you feel? And open up that dialogue. It could look like in a more just at home setting, just going on a walk and getting out with an animal that will promote exercise, which can help to lower blood pressure and to provide some overall calm. Another creative one that I have seen done is having a dog with you and setting out cones that are kind of a far distance from each other, walking with that animal to each cone, stopping at each cone and stating either something you're feeling or stating an intrusive thought that you're feeling or stating settings in which you feel not safe, and having that animal with you as your guide, providing safety and someone to walk with you through those things can be quite therapeutic for some as well. Or grooming or petting a horse while initiating talk therapy, or grooming or petting any animal can also help to promote the conversations and make the difficult conversations easier as well. When it comes to working animals, we do also want to mention the working animal considerations. You know, they are still animals, and we want to make sure that we are treating them with the dignity that they deserve. So we always want to put the animal safety into consideration, whether it be just an animal that is in someone's home or a service animal. We want them to have some time for both work, but also some time for play and to just be an animal. And to also recognize that animals can also experience PTSD and other mental health challenges. So if there is an animal that was in the home who is experiencing violence alongside the person, they may also be experiencing some similar PTSD symptoms, such as trembling or sometimes spinning around or hiding. Those can all also look like what that person is feeling, which can also be kind of talked about during the therapeutic session as well, and comparing the symptoms that the person and the animal might be having together could be easier for that person to more focus on the animal and what they might be feeling rather than talking about their own self, but also just wanting to make sure that that animal is staying safe. And also understanding that each animal has a different lived experience, same as humans. And so an escalator could be scary for one animal and it may not be scary for another, or a loud sound may be scary for one animal and not for another. So just making sure whatever animal you're working with, that you understand their behaviors, any triggers that they might have, to make sure that they are also safe. And the thought process of even taking in animal considerations into account is a very newly researched field, and there is not much research about it out yet. So researchers are working to see if there might be physiological factors in dogs that we aren't seeing, or any biomarkers that could be contributing to a heightened level of stress in animals who are working. So that's something that is definitely still being discovered. Given everything with the importance of the human-animal bond, it really just comes down to the fact that animal inclusive servicing is very important. It is found that 63% of individuals have reported difficulty seeking medical care due to having a pet with them. That could be a long-term hospitalized stay or even a shorter stay, such as just going in for a SANE kit. They may not have a place to bring their pet to, or they might feel like their pets will be in an unsafe place if they leave them at home while they go and seek that health care. So it could prevent them in seeking the care that they need to. as well as 97% of survivors reported that keeping their pet with them in shelter factored into their decision to leave and seek safety. 50% of those delayed leaving because they couldn't bring their pet, 40% never left because they couldn't take their pet, and 25% end up going back to their abuser because the animal is still in the home. And like I said, pets can aid in the social support and developing the rapport with that provider. So creating spaces in which animals are welcome. If there is a area where a stain kit is occurring, and maybe if they could have their animal with them or in their same room with them, even on leash with someone else, but just still in eyesight, or outside the door, or just somewhere nearby, or having a safe place they can have their animal while they're seeking shelter. All of these things will in turn allow for humans to seek the help that they need. So here are a couple of ways that you can get involved in making sure that we are including animals into our day-to-day lives and supporting our clients with their healing. The first is creating low and no barrier access with human servicing. Asking survivors or victims about pets, asking and trying to see if maybe they have a support system that could be an animal, rather than just focusing on the human supports. Incorporating pet interactions and activities such as self-care or therapy. So could be working with a client, working to develop goals and homework for the session. You could just incorporate a walk with your dog or time petting your cat as self-care and as a way to ground as part of therapy. Definitely asking questions about pet safety, just to inquire to make sure that their pets are safe at home and to allow that person to feel that you recognize the importance of the animal in their life. Goes a long way with establishing rapport, increasing sense of trust, and letting them know that you do see that pet as a viable support system. Working with the pet or working to keep the pet with the human is also important. So it could be that if you are a therapist, that you are helping to write the emotional support animal letters so that they can have their animal with them in home, or if they are leaving an unsafe situation so that they can find housing a little bit easier and be able to bring their animal with them into the home. Building pet-friendly policies into services. So like I said, if there's a space where they are going to have a sane kit done, allowing for their animal to come along or allowing for the animal to come with them to their therapy session. It could be that you don't even have a therapy animal, but that you're just allowing your client to bring their own pet with them. And that can also go a long way with buffering trauma, as well as getting engaged and looking into human-animal interaction research, whether that be conducting the research yourself or just looking more into the existing literature that's out there to learn more about the topic. When it comes to pet-inclusive servicing, here are some of the most common barriers that arise when it comes to having animals incorporated into human-based spaces. The number one that we hear is allergies, and that having an animal enter into a space with humans might trigger somebody's allergies. And there are some ways that you can combat this. It could be that you're incorporating some air humidifiers to help to cycle out the hair or to cycle out the allergens that are in the air. Or it could be that you have one area of the room dedicated to where the animals can go that's a little bit out of the way of where most of the people are. And just dedicate that to be the space that an animal goes to each and every time. Incorporating more frequent cleaning into your organization, as well as not everyone likes animals, which is totally valid. Animal-assisted therapy is not for everyone. Some individuals may just not have had experiences with animals, may have had negative experience with animals. So it's important to take into account that individual's lived experiences and preferences and safety. So this as well could be combated by having a space where the animals can go that's with the person that's a little bit out of range from the other people, or even having a space outside that's shaded that can act as a waiting room. Just getting creative about the ways in which you're utilizing the space to try and create some distance between the animal and any other strangers or unfamiliar people who might be around, as well as safety risks, which we should always take into account when working with animals, especially if the animal isn't used to being in a crowded place or they're also just coming out of experiencing trauma. It can pose a safety risk. And so again, creating distance and where the animal is and where the others are, putting up some signage or educating the folks who are in that space on appropriate ways to interact with animals to keep themselves safe, distancing children from animals and trying to encourage them on how to properly interact with animals. All of these things can be taken into account to try and provide some safety. Organizational policies is another barrier that comes up. Maybe an animal isn't allowed in a space, or maybe there could be some policies that prevent a professional helping person from having an animal come and join in that session. So you could just get creative and talk with your bosses, talk with the leadership, and just see if maybe you can have a trial period where you're having someone who already has a therapy animal join for an hour or 30 minutes, and just see how that goes and figure out how that works for your individual organization so that you can build upon that and make it work however best it does for your own organization. And lastly is funding. This is the biggest one, especially if you are needing to buy air purifiers or other things to make it work in your space. There are grants, of course, that you could apply for, but you could even try to find folks who have their own therapy animals who can bring them in. And again, just do a trial period. And then if you're seeing that it's working or it's something that your organization wants to pursue, at that point, then you can start looking into getting some substantial funding. So those are just a couple barriers that are important to address when it comes to trying to create pet inclusive services. And that is all that I have. And so I will open up the floor now to questions. I've also put my email here so that if anyone would like to reach out for more information or clarification on anything, or to be connected to the Institute for Human Animal Connection at DU, or just to connect, my email is there below.
So I do have a question.
Go ahead.
If someone were interested into looking into the process to get their animal trained to be a therapy animal, what would you recommend as the first steps?
The first steps for if they were trying to train their animal to be a therapy animal is first to begin some obedience training, as well as if it's a dog, doing the CGC certification, which is the Canine Good Citizen test. So that is a series of obedience training that you first undergo, and then it's a test that you do with the dog as their handler, just to see if they can pass the basic obedience, any like loud noises or anything to startle them. That both helps with determining how they act with others, if they enjoy interacting with others, and then also takes that obedience piece into account. So starting with some obedience training, getting the animal acclimated to new experiences. So maybe bringing them to more places, having them around more people, just so that they can start to be more comfortable in settings that they aren't used to, are both really good places to start.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Does anyone else have any questions for Kyra at this time? And I'll stop recording. So if you do happen to want to